Neckzilla is one of the freakiest mass monsters ever, and everyone can see the crazy potential written all over his physique. However, the start of his career hasn't been anything too special, I must say. He started out with quite the head start given how big he is. I mean, he got his pro card on the very first try and it wasn't even close, but after that he's just been okay. In bigger lineups he's done well to not so well, but now after doing that very small Flex Italy Pro, he is Olympia qualified, so there's that. But compare his early track record to pretty much his most similar peer, Big Ramy. Big Ramy also got his pro card easy, but he immediately won his first pro show, that being the 2013 New York Pro, and that lineup was pretty solid. So what I want to do today is compare each guy's physique at their first pro win. Big Ramy at the 2013 New York Pro, and Rubiel Mosquera at the 2025 Flex Italy Pro. Except I will actually be using the 2025 Dubai Pro package for Rubiel, simply because the Flex Pro's photos, videos, and lighting are just all bad. But I mean, there really wasn't any difference from the Dubai Pro package really at all, and they were back-to-back shows, so there shouldn't be too much different anyway. The only thing that changed between shows was the lineup, as it got a lot smaller in Italy, which resulted in Rubiel's win. For all intents and purposes, the version we're using is pretty much Rubiel's first pro win. I'm keeping it in the title regardless. I love disinformation. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into today's video. Remember, if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. So my first impression of this matchup just off the jump here is Rubiel is actually holding up quite well size-wise. In fact, I think he looks slightly thicker than Ramy. It's hard to tell though, especially because Ramy's photos were taken from a really sharp angle, but we'll have to make it work. But this is a good sign for Neckzilla, at least on the surface. However, bigger is not always better, especially because Big Ramy certainly had more than enough overall size even at this point. There is a law of diminishing returns here. Both of these guys are well past the point of being average, being above average, and they both excel in terms of muscle. But once you get so big, extra pounds just matter less, if that makes sense. Like 212 pounds to 232 on stage is quite the difference. That's the difference between a 212 competitor than a smaller open competitor. For example, Hottie and Derek probably don't weigh that much more than 232, maybe 250s, probably around the 240s though. But a 20 pounds difference between 280 and 300, especially when you have a bigger frame like these two guys, you're not going to notice that 20 pounds as much as you would on smaller guys, and guys that already weigh less. Tangent aside though, Big Ramy is certainly big enough, but what wins him the pose, and yes, he is winning, is actually the detail. Condition was the bane of his existence for a very long while, but Rubiel's biggest problem right now is the same thing, but even worse. In the legs, sure, Rubiel is bigger, but Ramy is more separated. But he is not flexing them super well to show off the superior separation, but just wait until the next pose. You'll really see the difference. Rubiel does win the calves, however. I'd also give the entire torso heap to Ramy. Both guys have good lats, but Ramy has the smaller waist, so he actually has the better taper. And finally, in the arms, Rubiel is good, but I prefer Ramy's for the better balance. Rubiel needs more triceps, and I like to see the arms more separated like Ramy's. I really wouldn't change anything about Ramy's arms actually. I think they're slightly underrated. Overall, the little things add up to give Ramy a win. Rubiel has a lot of size, but the finer details, both literally and figuratively, give it to Ramy, whether it be actual muscle separation or having a smaller waist. The front lat spread really shows how dominant Ramy's structure was. He was one of, if not the widest bodybuilder ever. And then you add those crazy quads into the equation, and that's maybe the best X-frame ever. The most exaggerated, I mean. Rubiel's pose is quite good too though. He has a wide structure up top, a smaller waist for how big he is, and big quads downstairs for an all-in-all pretty decent proportion for this level of size. The lats of course are pretty good too. You'd probably look at this pose and think not many people can or will be beating that, but Big Ramy does. The upper half on Ramy is just a bit better. He's a bit wider in the shoulders and smaller in the waist at the same time, and his lats are thicker and wider than Rubiel's. The rest of the upper body extras though, the chest, delts, and arms, are fairly close. That left delt on Ramy looks slightly pointy, and he did have gyno at this point in time. I do think it's easier to let those rookie mistakes slide in this particular matchup though, because these guys are rookies. I do expect these unsavory things to be on physiques of this caliber. Rubiel, for instance, has that belly button thing going on and his posing is not good. But moving down to the lower body, there is no discussion to be had. Rubiel's quads look like they're in the middle of the offseason. Ramy's quads aren't even the most peeled. He would get more condition himself later in his career, but he's still miles ahead of the neck. So because Ramy wins upstairs and definitely downstairs, I think this win is even bigger than the last. Rubiel's pose is okay, but Ramy was always a force to be reckoned with in this shot. Now in my comparisons, I use a margin of victory point system. If the win is small, medium, or large, the winner gets 2, 3, or 4 points respectively. That first pose can just be 2 points, but I think Ramy does just enough to break into the 3-point category here. The side chest is surprisingly close. For me, I consider prime Big Ramy's side chest to be the best side chest pose ever. Same with the front lat spread, honestly. But this isn't prime Big Ramy, this is young thug Ramy. He's honestly quite good, just not the best yet. Nowadays, if you ask around who has the best side shots right now, you're going to get a lot of answers for Neckzilla, and rightfully so. These are poses about width, thickness, and muscle from the side. That's a layup for him. And if you can hone in these poses anymore, they'll be some of the best ever. So these guys are in similar positions on paper, but what's not going to be up for debate is the side leg part of the pose. Big Ramy's side leg is the best ever. Even at this point in time, that's going to be like 90% of guys ever. He has so much size, but also these very deep lines. It's nothing short of terrific. Neckzilla has some lines coming in, but all in all, he just looks like Akeem Williams if he was fat. The upper body stuff is a lot harder to judge though. The pecs are kind of hard to make a call in, especially because Big Ramy is tilting away from the camera. We can't see the true extent of the thickness of his pecs. In my estimation, they're going to be roughly the same thickness and detail though. In the arm and delt, I'd probably put Ramy just ahead, again for a little more detail, but that's why Rubiel wins the midsection. He's keeping it flexed and showing off some extra detail. Ramy is taking a different approach and elongating the torso. It's a tight midsection, but I do like the detail in Rubiel's. So like I said, fairly close pose. It does kind of come down to the side leg though, simply because that's the only big swing in the shot. Everything up top is close. Ramy could be winning, he could not be too, but that win or loss would be by a razor's edge. But then you add that insane side leg in for Ramy, and win or lose up top, because it's narrow there, he'll win on the downstairs portion. I do kind of think he wins up top anyway though. This will be a narrow pose for sure though. Good on Neckzilla for keeping this so close. Again, he will have some of the best side shots ever, like top 3 at least, if he can fix a few things. Luckily, his career is just getting started. The rear double exposes a lot of young athletes because a good quality back is something that's going to take years to develop. Even some of the best backs like Phil's or Nick Walker's sometimes start out pretty weak. Well, I know a lot of people are going to look at this shot and just give it to Rubiel because his back looks thicker, but I mean, is it though? We'll take a look at the lower half in detail in a second, but just based on a single glance, it's clear that Big Ramy is in much better condition than Neckzilla. The first 3 poses were all indicators of that too. And to me, Rubiel's back actually looks a little puffy. So I'm wondering if Neckzilla was in the exact same condition as Ramy, how much of that extra fluff would go away? 10%? 20%? More? Also, as is, Ramy has the more detailed back, which is a very important aspect for this pose. He takes the arms and delts as well. The delts are more capped off and the arms are more peaked. The real kicker for this pose for me though, again, is the lower half. Who cares how big Rubiel's legs are when they look like this? Again, calling this off-season condition may be overstating how detailed they actually are. Ramy smokes him here, and unlike Rubiel's quote-unquote win upstairs, there's no doubt about it down here. Ramy has tremendous size to the quad sweeps, and the cords of the hams are really thick. But most importantly, you can actually tell these muscle groups apart from each other. They don't blur together into one big blob. Now, I know every pose shouldn't come down to the lower half, but from almost every single angle, Rubiel's legs draw my attention because they're so big. But if you have legs like that, if you have legs that big, you actually have to have them detailed enough to make them look like the actual muscle group. Because now my eyes are just drawn to your biggest flaw. It could be his biggest strength. It's certainly one of Ramy's because he's conditioned enough to look incredible with all that size. So here Ramy wins the lower body easily, and in the back he wins perhaps the most important aspect of detail. At the same time, Rubiel's back looks really soft to me. I think you could even have him winning up top. But top to bottom, Ramy has the better average and the better pose for another small win. Now, if you didn't believe me about Neckzilla's back not being as thick as it looked, I invite you to take a look here. Ramy's back wasn't the thickest at this point, but it looks like a continuation of the last pose. I can see how the thickness there translates into this shot here. Rubiel, though, looks a lot different. He has to spread the wings now, and when he does, you can see that he is not only not as thick as the last shot, but he doesn't even look thicker than Ramy here. On top of that, Ramy is wider. So Ramy is better in every aspect up top, and we all know what I have to say about the lower half. Needless to say, Ramy dominates the lower half and takes a firm win up top, so the margin will be increased for this pose to 3 points. We're back to another side pose now, and let me give some more credit to where it's due. Rubiel is really good here, even next to Ramy. Not in the side leg though, Ramy maintains his firm grasp there, but up top is more competitive. The midsection is close, the abs are deeper on Ramy, but the entire midsection is more locked in on Rubiel. The pecs are also a wash pretty much. The angle doesn't help Ramy, but with that in mind, if it's close with that angle for him, then maybe he's winning, accounting for the handicap. But then the armadillo also goes to Ramy, all of it. He's plenty thick, he's more detailed in the shoulder, shoulder and the tricep pops more with the better separation there. Rubiel actually has more size in his tricep, I just wish it was more separated. All in all though, this is probably the closest pose so far, but make it that what you will because Ramy has won every shot so far. Initially, I thought I was going to give it to Rubiel here and throw him a bone, but I decided to just stick with what I thought was the more correct choice and give Ramy the narrow win. There's a lot of size and width in his pose, but the devil is in the details yet again. And like in the side chest, the only big swing in the shot for the muscle groups is the side leg, so there's that. But I also do prefer Ramy's upper half here as well. Rubiel is once again showing a lot of promise though. We are at the penultimate pose of this comparison now, the abs and thighs. Honestly, I think Rubiel looks pretty good. From the waist up though. But he does have these blocky abs with pretty good separation, especially for how poor his overall condition is. But speaking of overall condition, the legs look like a melted chocolate bar. That may be a little racist, but I'll leave it in because that's exactly what I think of when I look at Rubiel's legs. But anyway, Ramy comes into this pose as yet again just a strict upgrade to our friend Neckzilla. I personally prefer Rubiel's abs to Ramy's, but I don't think that's the objective answer. Look at the separation between Ramy's abs and look how thick they are. You could lose your car keys in there. Ramy's taper is also a little better than Rubiel's. However, when you look past the abs, you are going to notice Ramy's gyno, and now my nips are hard as well. And for the lower body, I mean, I'm done telling you what I think, you can clearly see it. Ramy's not the most deeply separated by any means, but this beats Rubiel any day of the week. You even get some slight feathering from Ramy. So yet again, we are left with a victory for Ramy. The only reason this isn't a 3-pointer is because I like Rubiel's abs more personally. I'm just trying to stop the bleeding really, man. This is embarrassing. In all honesty, this probably should be a 3-point win for Ramy because he's winning the abs and thighs portions of the pose, but whatever. Thankfully, this is the last pose because this is getting pretty redundant. I sound like a broken record, so I'll just cut to the chase. The legs pretty much win Ramy this pose. There are crazy upper bodies on these guys, full arms, delts, and good chests, and Rubiel actually has decent detail in his pecs, but Ramy is more detailed in the arms and delts and pretty good in the chest as well. He also has better abs on top of that. He also has the more separated abs on top of that. At that point, with the upper half close, if I can get a pose where the bottom half doesn't have the condition of chewed gum, then I'll take that one. Ramy is not even the best here. He looked more separated in other shots, but what's his competition exactly? And that's just it. Is Neckzilla competition for Ramy? Well, let's give these last 2 points to Ramy and finish this comparison out in the second round. Next in this comparison, we have the second round of judging, which are the 4 overall physique categories: shape, muscularity, condition, and flaws. Let's start with muscularity because I'm throwing Neckzilla a bone. I thought he looked just a little bit thicker than Ramy, honestly, in some areas at least. Obviously, they're both mass monsters and pretty close in that regard, that's why we did this comparison, but I think Rubiel carries just a little more size overall. And notice how I'm saying size and not muscle, because with that condition, we just don't know for sure. But you know what? I'll give him a small 2-point win. Again, he looks a bit more thick, meaning a bit more muscular to me, but of course we'd have to see that on a real stage. And clearly at this point I think you can tell how this is going, so it just doesn't matter. But next we have condition. This will actually be a bigger 3-point win for Ramy. Ramy is not the most peeled or dry individual, especially in 2013, but the gap here between these two is so vast that I have to make it something more than 2 points. I feel that 4 points is a little overblown, especially because Ramy isn't bringing 10 out of 10 condition, but honestly with how Rubiel's legs looked, you could definitely stretch this to 4, and I really wouldn't care. Next we have shape. Now, neither of these guys are works of art exactly. However, I still find Ramy's physique to have better flow. They both have legs that are overdeveloped and things that don't match, like the calves for Ramy or the arms in some shots for Rubiel, but Ramy is more balanced top to bottom by my estimation. He's also a bit wider and the waist a bit smaller. So all in all, I can't give a big win. He's no Frank Zane, but I can give him a small 2-point win over Rubiel, who is even worse in terms of shape and flow. And then we have flaws. I did say earlier that these guys are rookies, so I do expect some issues out of both. It's par for the course. We should still account for those things though. Rubiel has that belly button issue and his posing is pretty wonky. Now the belly button doesn't bother me too much, but I can understand why it might bother someone else. What bothers me more personally though is Ramy's gyno. That's probably the worst flaw to have outside of blatant SEO use, and even then I thought one of Ramy's delts was sus at times. Are these flawed physiques? Absolutely. But I think Ramy's issues weigh on him just a little bit more. So Rubiel ends this comparison on a high note, relatively speaking, and shores up an additional 2 points. Alright, now it's time to reveal the final scores. As you can imagine, this was a blowout. Winning this comparison with 85.4 points was young thug Ramy, and Neckzilla could only muster up a measly 14.6. That's obviously a massive difference, but would the gap be that big in real life? Well, honestly, yeah, probably. Now, this is just a two-way comparison that doesn't paint the full picture. A bodybuilder in one of these matchups only has one person to be compared to, but a lot of the time, that's not how bodybuilding shows are run. Someone could do slightly better or or worse depending on what the full lineup and callouts look like. But with that said, I don't even think Rubiel would be second at Ramy's pro debut. This was a stacked show. You had a young John De La Rosa in fourth. Could Rubiel have beat him? I mean, yeah, probably. He was smaller at this event as it was one of his first pro shows, and he didn't yet have the crazy details or maturity that he does now, but he's still a lot more conditioned than Rubiel. In third, you had Juan Morel. He was a big dude structure-wise, and he was way more conditioned than Neckzilla. So I think he could take a win in many scenarios over Rubiel. And then runner-up at the show was Victor Martinez. Now, he wasn't at his best or biggest, but the conditioning gap would have been the biggest between these two guys, and Victor had that great shape and was also still very complete. I'd say he'd beat Neckzilla the vast majority of times. So that means Rubiel would be third at best in this show. So that 70-point gap seems more and more realistic. But this comparison wasn't about Juan, John, or Victor. It was about Big Ramy. So why can't Rubiel beat him? Ramy is just an upgrade to Rubiel in every way. Neckzilla is a brute that carries a lot of size, but that's it. The proportions aren't that good and the condition is awful. Ramy has a ton of size too. He was already the biggest guy on the block in 2013, but he does other things. His flow was a lot better than Rubiel's, and Ramy actually looked like he dieted for the show. The condition edge alone pretty much won Ramy every single shot. And if that didn't win him the pose, then the better proportions could help too. Could Rubiel have won any pose? I mean, there are arguments for these side shots and rear double, but even those poses are a stretch. Even if you gave all of those to him, they'd have to be by narrow margins, and that would still probably give Ramy like a 40-point lead still. The fact is, size alone can't win shows, even at Rubiel's level of muscularity. You have to have something else, anything else. I mean, take a look at the Dubai Pro. He got beat by way smaller competitors like Bonac and Tonio because those guys were of much higher quality. So with that, it stands to reason that Ramy should decimate Rubiel. If Ramy matches his size, which he pretty much does, that takes away the one thing Rubiel has going for him. So it was a clear victory for Ramy. In hindsight, it was clear that Big Ramy was going to be great. I think back then, I would have overestimated how good he ultimately became if I just saw this 2013 version. I think a lot of guys at the time thought he would have been better. Not that 2 Olympia titles aren't great, but he spent a lot of the shows bringing in subpar condition, and that really hurt his overall career. He could have been a lot more decorated if he locked in sooner. In Neckzilla's case, I'm a little more restrained on what I'm predicting for his future. The hang-up for me is that, as of right now at least, he doesn't seem to like bodybuilding that much. He also has to really work on the condition, and even then, I think he's just going to be a guy who doesn't have the best separation genetically. But right now, we just don't know. I think Neckzilla can be very good. As good as Ramy is quite the stretch, Ramy was already showing a lot of promise at his very first pro win. Rubiel's potential is still very high. I can see him potentially winning an Olympia title or more down the road if he does everything, simply because no one else looks like this. But he does have more to do than Ramy did when Ramy was in Rubiel's position. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. Would you give any pose to Rubiel, and what are your predictions for his career? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you guys like this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. And if you guys want to get your hands on some high quality supplements while supporting my channel even further, head over to Arms Race Nutrition. Then at checkout, use my code Project10 to get 10% off your entire order. That's code Project10 at armsracenutrition.com. And finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Get Neckzilla.